So, hello everybody. How are you today? Happy Friday. I hope you're able to relax at this end of the week somewhat. And I'm very happy to be here today with Diana Theodores, Dr. Diana Theodores, who is the author of a wonderful book called Performing as You. So, Diana is a presence and performance coach, a high energy speaker, and of course an Amazon best-selling author, and she inspires leaders to bring their full selves forward. And at the heart of her book, Performing as You, is the message, which is really brilliant message. If all the world's a stage, then the greatest role you ever get to play is you. So, of course, when you write your book, you are performing through your written words, and it's important to have an authentic author voice that delivers the real you to your readers. But when it comes to the audiobook, you kind of don't have the protection of the page, I feel. You're kind of just that much closer. So it's going to be really useful to hear from Diana, who has recently recorded and launched her audiobook, how that process went for her and the lessons she's drawn out for it. So Diana, hi and welcome.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks very much. And hello, everyone who's joined us today. Look, I'm really excited just to get a chance to share with you a few experiences and perhaps some pointers that will help anyone planning to do an audiobook with the process, a bit of research, a bit of rehearsal technique, and just share that excitement as well. And what are some of the wonderful things that emerge after you've done a recording of your book. So it's a great process. I just thought I'd start with asking a question that you could just think about, and that is kind of going back to your childhood and thinking about, when did you have that first experience of you heard something? It might have been a book that was read to you, or you heard a record on your record player, or you heard, something that inspired you so much. And, for me, I just remembered that I heard Peter Ustinov narrating Peter and the Wolf
Oh, yes.
when I was a child, with the
Yep.
whole London Philharmonic, symphony orchestra playing, and as he tells the story, and I was completely mesmerized. And that led me to, all kinds of childhood rituals, like setting up a cardboard boxed radio studio and using a Coca-Cola bottle and making radio shows every day.
Wow.
So just the idea of falling in love with audio. I think we all love to hear stories and be a listener. So that's the starting point. You have to really love audio. And I think that audiences love audio. I think they really do. I remember when I first published the book, the question that everyone asked, clients, colleagues, friends, family, when's the audiobook going to come out? And that's really interesting to me. At the time, I hadn't really thought about that so much, but that was the question. And when I think about it, and when I think we all think about it, you be the audience for a moment. Just think about how you find audio such a time value proposition. So you might be going jogging or doing your exercise or driving, and you're listening to an audiobook. So you feel like you're being productive and learning. So that's one thing. Or it can be incredibly relaxing. We can get into an audio listening state where our bodies are very relaxed, and we enter into a different kind of listening and a different kind of processing than we do when we're reading. So that's another, I kind of think about it like surround sound. When we're in our studies or our offices and we have lots of books around us, even if we're not actively reading them, they kind of penetrate our bodies, just that information, that content, that story. So you're in a different state. So I think that an audiobook straight off from a sales point of view, if you think about it, it drives your content even further because you've got the written book and you've got a whole audience that loves the audio, and that might be a different audience. So you're kind of driving your sales And you're also driving your content to be heard in different ways. So I think that's a really big starting point for considering the
Absolutely.
audiobook.
And you know, as a publisher, I can tell you that audiobook sales have gone up a lot during lockdown. I mean, all book sales have actually, but audiobook sales are massive. And I think you're absolutely right that that is what so much people are looking for at the moment, something to listen to in, you know, in downtimes, in other times, while they're doing other things. So yeah, really very, very interesting points.
Yeah.
Leslie says that when she was young, she heard the audio story of the flower fairies, which is lovely. Yes, lots of
Now,
memories there.
those childhood inspirations are really important to just reconnect with, because they give you a wonderful kind of creative energy about the power of the spoken word. So you connect with that yourself creatively, and it's a really good energy. It's a great motivator. The other thing is just, you know, when you start the process of thinking about audio, put yourself immediately into the role of audience. You know, what voices out there do you feel attracted to? Notice if you're listening to a news anchor woman reading the news, or an advertisement, or a film, or a television program, or a radio drama. Just listen to voices that are speaking to you and selling you something, or telling you something, or talking about something. How do you hear those voices? Which voices attract you? Which voices irritate you? Because let's face it, the first and most fundamental part of your research is you've got to love the narrator's voice. You've got to be attracted to the narrator's voice. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of listening to some books thinking, gosh, I love the content, but I wish it was read by someone else.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. That's so true. I mean, I have to say, I'm not sure I should say this really, but I will. I really can't bear the sound of Brene Brown's voice. I love her books, but I do not like the sound of her voice when she's narrating them.
Yes.
So
Well,
I don't.
there you are. We all have our inspirations, and we all have our sensibilities as listeners. So it's important just to get a bit more analysis for yourself. What kind of voices attract you, and why? Why do they make the impact on you that they make? So that kind of takes us to the next thing about your research when you're planning your audiobook, and that's thinking about um, what is your subject, and can you start researching other books in your market area? So, you know, you start listening to authors in that area. So it might be whether it's self-help, maybe it's therapy, maybe it's psychology, maybe it's thought leadership, maybe it's a practical how-to kind of a book. Just start getting familiar with some voices in the different market areas that you are going to be writing in, or that your audiobook is going to be in, and start making a short list. You know, really notice each author has a style, an attitude, a pace, a tone. All of these things have a major impact. So for instance, when I was working on my audiobook, I listened to everything from memoirs from some really inspirational women to books about women leaders and thought leadership, and then started listening to voices. I found some really aggressive, some were much too in your face, some were really hard sell, some simply were too fast, too nasal, too shrill, whatever those things are. So again, start finding your tribe. Start finding your tribe and making a short list, and have fun doing the research, really listening and grabbing hold of, why does this book really do it right in this similar sphere that my book is in? So make your short list and start noticing and analyzing a little bit, because it will really help. Um, the next thing about all of this is, you know, I just say fall in love with your voice. start start playing with your actual voice. Start recording your voice and listening to your voice. You know, I'm amazed at how many people say to me in coaching sessions, you know, I don't like the sound of my voice.
I was just going to say that, Diana, because I think I've so many people say exactly that. That because we don't hear our own voices in the way that other people do, do we? I mean, I know it's a basic point, but
Yeah.
we hear one thing, and then when you hear it recorded, it sounds very different, and somehow you kind of become terribly aware of all the bits of your voice you don't like, all the habits you have, maybe perhaps it is the nasal thing or the repetition or the harshness of your voice, whatever it is. How do you get over
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
that kind of dislike of that?
Well, I think, as I said, when I say fall in love with your voice, I mean really start to have a relationship with it and get to know it. So play. My big word is play with it, so that you can break out of your habits. So if you record yourself, even speaking a few lines from your book, or reading the newspaper out loud, or a fairy tale to your child, or whatever it is, keep working your voice out loud for a while. Get it out of the body and into the airwaves. Get it out of your head. Stop, not reading on the page, but speaking it out loud, and record it. Record it and record it. Little tiny snippets, and just play it back. And my suggestion about playing is that big as if game. Read a few lines as if you're a news anchor woman. Read a few lines like you're a barrister in the courtroom. Read a few lines like you are telling a child a magical fairy tale around a campfire. Play with your voice. Make believe you're doing a United Nations speech from a podium. Try it out as an intimate conversation. Just play. Play with your voice so that you stretch the dynamics and you get out of the habit of one way of speaking, because yourselves, everyone, this is not a one size fits all, because your book has contours. And what I mean by that is, think about the structure of your book. Your book is a series of stories, right? You've got your market story. This is why I've written the book. This is my introduction to the reader. This is what you're going to get from the book. So you've got your big market story. That's one voice. You've got your case studies, perhaps, your kind of evidence stories. My client did this, or my customer did this, and this is what they found out. Great, evidence stories. That's another voice. You've got your personal stories that you might be telling in your book, now being relatable to your reader. That's another voice. You might have templates. You might have illustrations. You might have exercises or pointers. Your book has lots of different contours. So it's not a one size fits all. And so the next bit of research to do around, one, finding your inspirational voices, getting your own voice exercised, playing with it, recording it. Third is get to know the map of your book. Start going through your book like a script, like a radio script. Start marking out the different contours, because you're taking your reader on a road trip. So you have to change gears. Yeah. We're not in one gear all the time. So just start getting familiar with what's the layout of my book, and when do I need to change gear? So you know what's coming. You've got the signposts, and that, if you can do that ahead of time, it's hugely helpful.
Yes, that's really interesting, Diana, because when I coach people, mentor people through writing their books, I talk about different kinds of text. Like, you've got your case studies, you've got your hard informational text, your content, and you've got your case studies, you've got your own story, and
Yeah.
then you've got sort of references from other people's work. And are you saying that you should have almost like a different voice for a different style for those different areas?
Well, the answer is yes, but very subtly. So obviously you're not going to change massively, but as long as you understand that your listener is going to be in different environments. Maybe they're eating lunch while they're listening. Maybe they're lying in bed. Maybe they're driving the car. So just like your listener is in different environments that have different contours, you have different contours. So for instance, when I worked on my map, I recognized that I had, the main narrator's voice. So I tried to find the pace that I thought would be helpful to the reader, a fairly slow pace, but not too slow, finding the pace that I found interesting from listening research. Then I noticed, okay, I also have case studies, so I'm going to slightly change gear here. How do I zoom in a little bit? So a zoom in might be I slow down a little bit and open up that story a little bit. When I talked about my personal stories, I think that I struck a little bit more of an enchantment voice, the kind of once upon a time, but it's very subtle. It's very subtle. When I did summaries at the end of my chapters and gave coaching pointers, it was much brisker, much snappier. Just, matter of fact, this is immediately actionable. Off you go and do it. So you could find slightly different nuances, and those nuances really register with your listener. So yeah, find your map.
That's such a great point. And Jackie Harper says great point about mapping the book vocally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a
So obviously, just to reiterate, it's not a huge thing. It's not really massively overt, but that you're signaling a slightly different kind of voice. So especially imagine giving a visualization exercise in a book. You can't go fast and punchy. You have to pause. You have to breathe. You have to let your listener relax. So you change gear. So we just have these different platforms, and again, record yourself going through the different kinds of contours in your book. Do a whole recording of just your exercises or just your storytelling, or, just start breaking it down into small sections where that you have a place to go with your voice. And then, of course, it goes without saying, have a go recording yourself reading through your book. And just sit back and listen. What's the experience? It's wonderful because you learn so much.
That's so you would really suggest a rehearsal, if you like, before you get into the recording studio of recording it yourself first.
Yeah, I mean, if you can spare the time to do that, it's great. You don't have to do it all in one go, but it does help you to get through the material so that you're really familiar with it. And here's why. We tend to think that on the day of recording, we're just going to take our book and it's, in our iPad or whatever form it's going to be in by the microphone, and you're just going to read it. But of course, you're not reciting, you're speaking about ideas. You've got to bring it to life. So you've got to be familiar with what's on the page. It can't simply be an encounter with the page for the first time. So this is about bringing your subject to life. And so you've got to be a little bit more familiar with those words before that moment and really enjoy that process of investigating it and getting familiar with it.
Yeah.
Any questions at this point before
No,
we?
no questions. I think people are listening intently. Susie says this is very timely for me. Thank you. Great, Susie. Susie also said I love the sound of my own voice. I'm not sure whether she meant it in the way that you had, but that's great. That's wonderful.
Well, that's very healthy. And just enjoying that time of playing and experimenting, because it's joyful, it's creative, and it's part of the deal if you're going to be the narrator of your book.
Absolutely. And I think particularly for um, business books that are there to build your business and meet with and engage your ideal clients, it's really important to narrate your own book, unless there's some particular reason why you can't. But I think that's such a big part of making that communicating in that kind of direct way with the people you want to work with, be in touch with, have as partners or colleagues. It's great.
Yeah. I guess there's something to be said too. If you want to find the professional narrator, that's a fun process too. You know, which
Yeah.
voice would you love reading your book? And that's a whole other process, but one to think about, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but so let's just think a little bit now about what happens in the recording studio. So on the day, the big day arrives, and in my experience, and Lucy, I think you've also said this is a very common experience. You might have the experience of the one hit wonder. You know, you're in the studio for one day and it might be 8 hours of recording. So it requires stamina and energy. Um, and it's maybe not the ideal, you know, maybe if we had the luxury of recording in small sections and having it all edited, that's a different process. But certainly in my case, it was in one day, one take, 8 hours in front of a microphone with a little lunch break.
Yeah.
Um,
That is usually how it works. I'm just breaking in because Jackie says, could you add different speakers to do exercises or other elements? And yes, you can, but it does complicate the recording process and probably makes it more expensive as well. Um, so, excuse me. I think mostly we well, certainly when we're doing the books for Rethink Press, we tend to just, you know, get the author into the studio and they do
yeah,
it all themselves. It becomes, you know, a
I,
much more
I think,
complicated thing if you're going to add other people in as well.
yeah, well, although a colleague that I just spoke to said that he he had one other person in the studio with him for certain moments where it was a dialogue between two
Oh,
characters to exemplify something. So like a conversation between yourself and your alter ego or whatever it was, and he had someone else come in and do the dialogue with him. But you know, I'm sure that there are solutions, and possibly just even playing it with your own voice, but in a slightly different way. So
yes,
there
that's
are
interesting and a
solutions.
nice idea. I have actually read recent research that says that listeners prefer one single voice and I think it also said that they prefer one single voice without too much of an accent. To be honest, that's what they preferred, a single narrator for a
Right.
book. But obviously, if you have dialogue, you yeah, you may need.
Well, that's really important to hear because this is different from, you know, book at bedtime or a radio drama. This
Yeah.
is, you know, you're driving content and you're taking your reader on a journey, you know, with your content. So you're with a key message, you know, you are really helping them to arrive at a change or a realization or a new perspective, but they come away with some kind of call to action from reading your book, some kind of transformative aha, and so they need to build a relationship with you, the narrator. So I think that's a really good point, Lucy, that they can trust you because they keep hearing you. Um, so on the day, of course, we have obvious things like, you know, have plenty of water, make sure that you've got lozenges with you, have layers on so that you can stay warm because sometimes there's an air conditioning system, you know, all that kind of stuff. Um, Physical warm up is absolutely essential. I can't emphasize it enough. Dance around, jog in place, stretch, do lots of face exercises, giving your jaw a massage so that you can start to work the articulation muscles, you know, all of that stuff, opening your mouth, all of that stuff. Give yourself a thorough warm up. There's nothing like it. It energizes you. You get a glow. You get a feeling of positive traction I'm about to do this. And it really helps you to stand your ground when you're then standing up with your good open posture, feet planted evenly in the floor, you know, getting your microphone in the right place and feeling that wonderful sense of strength and freedom, you know, in your voice, your breathing, your whole being is poised and ready and standing strong. And it's a great feeling. This is not to say that you can't record your book sitting down.
Actually, I was going to say, did you stand up? Because I sat down
Yeah,
to record my last book. Yeah.
I stood up the whole time because I just feel more connected myself. But of course, you can also create that energy and that traction sitting down. This is not a, this is not a complete rule. It's simply your preference. But it is true that, the more oxygen flowing through you, the better your posture, the more you are connected, your body, your breath, your belief, your words, they really align. So I would just urge you absolutely to get yourself well energized and warmed up, and think about that voice shaping words and thinking about breathing, really taking some deep breaths to get grounded. And of course, the power of the pause, so that you have well practiced by that point, not rushing. You found your pace, you've got into your stride, and then just really playing the punctuation. When you come to a question mark, it's a question. When you come to a full stop, it's a full stop. You take a breath. There are moments that you've got all throughout your text that are telling you this is what happens next. So if you just keep a pace that's enough so that you feel, I see what's coming, you're anticipating all the time what's coming up. And again, pure pleasure. You can always stop. You can always stop. There's an editing process, which is wonderful. And your producer will always clean up the recording and make the sound gorgeous and all of that. But these are things that the more you can find your stride, the more you can pay attention to the contours, to the punctuation, to using pauses, to breathing, and to really getting that wonderful sense of groundedness, the more you're going to enjoy the whole process, because you will be talking to your listeners, not simply reciting from a page. It's a very big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact, I mean, when you're enjoying it, that will come across as well, won't it? I mean, I did actually expect when I sort of started the recording, I thought, oh goodness, this is going to be, this is going to be a long day. It's going to get very boring reading my own stuff. But actually, I have to say, I got into it and I enjoyed it. And it was sort of, it was that feeling of communicating, I think, even though there's nobody there except the editor, the producer. It was, really about kind of trying to find that sweet spot of communicating with your reader, with your ideal reader. And actually, I don't know if this sounds a bit sort of sort of too boastful, if you like to say it, but actually, I thought I enjoyed reading it because I actually enjoyed what I'd written as well. I thought, it felt quite good to me. So,
Yeah, and that brings us to that. That's the most beautiful thing you could have said, because that really brings us to the most important part of this whole experience, which is in that moment of recording your words out loud and giving your voice to this content that you've written, that you've worked on for a long time. Something fabulous happens in that moment. You hear yourself speaking these words and you feel suddenly this sense of alignment. You just feel what I am speaking, I actually believe in. I feel aligned with this. My sense of meaning and purpose is sustained from the moment I wrote it, however many months ago that might have been. The message that I'm talking about is still resonating with me. It still feels true. Now, that's a fantastic experience. You might also experience little tiny moments, very subtly, of a struggle. Something isn't as smooth or as flowing. And that's always an interesting moment of discovery too, something to come back to. How else might I say this or think about this going forward? These are very small things, but when we hear our own language coming out, we make lots of discoveries. And of course, there's this fantastic sense of creativity that happens as well, because Speaking out loud is an embodied experience. It's a physical act. And when you are in that process, you're releasing amazing things in your imagination. And you could, if you had the opportunity at that moment, you actually feel like you could riff and ad lib off the end of every chapter and generate loads more content. You just are on fire with ideas. Because when you hear yourself speaking your own words, something is released in you that offers more possibility. You know, you've had an encounter, you've had this wonderful experience of finding yourself, reconnecting with those words, and then thinking, how else can I talk about this? And what else is there to say? So that brings us to this wonderful experience of repurposing the content. You know, when you have the experience of discovering that all of the things that you've written still ring true and even offer new thoughts and new ideas, new ways of saying what you've said, and the possibility of other and more content. How exciting is that? It's like this book just keeps on giving many, many gifts.
That's
So, you
fantastic.
know,
So, yeah, so I mean, Bridget Sarikas says this is so helpful, makes me believe I can take Stupid Gone Viral, which is her book, co-authored book, brilliant book, to the next level, which absolutely, Bridget, you definitely can. And then Jackie asks, does it matter if you paraphrase a little or should it be word perfect? I mean, actually, for your audiobook, it should be word perfect. You're not there. Your audiobook is just as your Kindle, your ebook is exactly the same as your print book. Actually, in this case, your audiobook really does need to be exactly the same or almost. I mean, you can sometimes add a bonus bit, but it's not a place to be riffing or to be paraphrasing or kind of
yeah,
going, oh, does that make sense? Have I explained myself properly? Or
no,
it's
exactly.
you really.
The paraphrasing, the creativity bit comes in later when you start generating other content off of the book. So you've done the recording, and the recording has given you the chance to reacquaint yourself with your own content in a new way. So now you've got your written book, which has been a discovery process, yes. And then you've got the audio book, which is another discovery altogether because you hear your own content differently than when you are writing. Two different voices, two different sensibilities, and two different lenses through which you experience your own content. Fantastic. Now, as you start thinking, gosh, I could make some podcasts, I could write some short articles, I could do some LinkedIn posts, I could send out a newsletter, I could have, I could make a video. There are so many ways to think about how to generate ideas coming from your book, especially the audio experience. Now you can paraphrase. Now you can talk about a theme or a case study or some coaching pointers or whatever those things might be. Now you've got a chance to reimagine how you want to say those things because you're not reading anymore. It's not word perfect script. It's, hey, let's talk about this. Here's my latest thinking on this. So you have a chance to paraphrase away. It's wonderful. And the glorious thing about that is the more you do that, the more you are expanding your repertoire of your own voice and your capacity to speak to your subject and to reach different audiences. So it's a great process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I always say that when you write your book, you're creating a mental archive, which, because you're actually writing it down, it sort of sticks in your head. So you're never at a loss after having done that to answer questions or to get up and kind of extemporize or give a talk or whatever. But actually, when you've read it as well, that gives you an extra layer of knowledge because you're reading your own material through, you're hearing it. So it kind of solidifies is not the right word, but it really settles in your psyche, and you know it just so well that you can go and as you say, kind of expand on it and use that as a basis in so many other ways. It's brilliant.
I love what you just said. It's a mental archives. That's such a great expression, and it is because as you've embodied your story, and once you do that, you can tell it in so many ways. And how wonderful is that? You can generate so many different ways of communicating with your audiences. So again, just start really looking forward to the process. It's a creative process. It's not a stressful process. Enjoy it. Really enjoy the experimentation, the exploration, all of the, being the audience yourself, getting to know your own voice, getting to know your own book, your own content. And I also forgot to mention, when you have that recording moment before you go in, you've had a chance to look at your book, take at least one copy and just mark it up like mad. It's your script. It's your directorial notes. Don't be afraid to make lots of notes, tags, really have fun with that. And just think, this is a living document. I've got to get it into me and really get to know my own content so well that I can speak it fluently and vividly and with great sense of purpose. So really enjoy that.
So, Diana, are there some you've given us some really excellent do's for going into the recording studio, for doing the exercises, for taking water, for being warm and layered, so or warm or cool. But are there some don'ts as well? I mean, what do you find most annoying on audiobooks that you listen to? What would you tell us to guard against?
Well, funnily enough, one of the things is some books have, I know some books have um, music in their introductions. Sometimes the music is too loud and it's kind of clashing with the actual audio. So I don't know, in our case with our books, I didn't put any music into the background for the introduction. But the don'ts for me are largely two things: talking too fast, just too fast, and not understanding that the process of listening, you have to hear it, you have to process it, you have to inhale it. Your listener is in very different environments. So you've got to consider your audience. Just imagine them in all the different ways that they might be listening. So you've got to take care of them. If you don't warm up, so don't warm up. That's my big don't. Do not fail to warm up, because a lot of people just think they can go in cold and just get the microphone set up and get it out and start. And of course, how could you possibly start from a cold place where your body, your brain, your heart, your imagination is not warmed up? So you've really got to do that. And I think you can tell when a voice isn't warmed up to their own subject and warmed up to themselves, warmed up to the reader. I think it's important, if it's possible, to understand the setup of the recording studio before you're there. I mean, some of you might be doing home recordings. The studio might come to you. You might be, if you're working with Rethink Studio, then that's one very particular experience. I think you need to understand the environment as much as you can that you're going into. So learn as much as you can about what that environment is like. What's it like for you? Find out as much as you can.
Yeah, because for most of us, I mean, And I would say that it's really important that your recording is professional. So I would say, don't try this at home
Oh, no, no,
because, I mean, for example, Audible are incredibly picky about about not only the quality of the recording, but the way it's packaged, edited, the whole kind of thing. And we have had a number of authors who have done their own recordings. I mean, sometimes in a different recording studio to ours, and they've been rejected. I mean, up to 3 times Audible have rejected their package, and they've had to go back and do it again. So make sure, however you're doing it, that you're using a professional studio or producer who knows what is needed.
yes.
So yes, so there's that side of it.
I didn't
And
even consider, that this would be an author's own at-home recording. I mean,
so
everything I've been talking about assumes a professional recording studio. So
absolutely, yeah.
don't try this at home. Absolutely not. That's really, really important. But I guess, the big don't really, that is the overwhelming one, is simply don't go into this thinking, I'm just going to read my book in front of a microphone. And that's what an audiobook is.
Yeah.
As you've heard through this discussion, there is a process that's a rigorous process and a hugely enjoyable process, but it's a critical process. And so, go into it with that sense of real exploration and discovery for yourselves. And it requires practice. It requires really looking at this as the next project. The written project was one, the audio project is the next one, or a different one. So now I don't know, some people might be only doing an audiobook. I don't know. So it's interesting to think.
Yes, I mean some people do. I've never worked with anyone just on an audio book, because I think when you're writing a book anyway, you still need that, even if it's just going to be an audio book, you still need that whole process of editing, of proofreading, of making sure that it's that it is absolutely right. Because as you say so interestingly, punctuation in audio is just as important as when you're reading it off the page. It directs you as to how to narrate your book. So yes, I mean it's interesting because I haven't ever worked with someone who's just only wanted to do an audio book, but
Yeah.
yeah.
When earlier in the conversation, you asked about voices, voices that attract, voices that irritate. The one thing that irritates me no end in any narrator is when they make question marks instead of full stops when it's a full stop. So everything is like this and like this and like this. You know what I mean? Here? That drives me mad. So think about what drives you mad as a listener and stay away from it.
Yes, absolutely. That's kind of what's it called? Kind of right? Is it called rising inflection?
Yeah.
It's quite an Australian vocal kind of habit, isn't it? Particularly, but yeah, it makes you sound very uncertain, doesn't it? It doesn't make you sound authoritative if you're asking a question for everything you're saying.
Yeah. But again, and these are just habits, everything
Yeah.
we're talking about is a habit. So, monotone is a habit. Rising inflection is a habit. Talking too fast is a habit. And that's why that process of exploring your voice and listening to what inspires you is really key. And then the last one, mapping out the contours of your own book. What's the format? And just get to know how you might shift gear a little bit. I'll just share the screen with you for a moment,
Please do. Yes.
if I may, because I just think that it's important to have a sense of the fun of it all. So it was a lot of fun on the day, just having a great time. And here is what one setup looks like, that you've got your microphone and then you've got your actual text in front of you and you're scrolling. And finally, when you do produce your audiobook with Rethink, they will do a fantastic job on your audio promotion. Mine just came out very recently. for audio, and it is a thrill, I can tell you. And it's very, very interesting to notice how much attention your audiobook gets, not necessarily versus your written book, but it's a different kind of attention. Uh, I've been getting audiences that I didn't have before. So it's just a thought. It's an interesting way to think about how your content gets driven out there, to different kinds of audiences who have their preferences.
Yeah, it is a really good point, and I think it's true. I mean, I think it's true to say that the three formats you can have your book in, the obviously the print, the Kindle, and the audio, they don't one doesn't prevent people from buying the other.
Yeah,
There are often people who will only listen to audio, so if you don't have the audio, you lose that audience. And some people will sometimes buy both the Kindle and the print book. Or, I mean, actually, I often buy, because it's cheaper this way, I often buy the Kindle, and then on Amazon it says, there's a box to tick if you want to add audio, and that's usually cheaper
yeah,
combined than
yeah,
actually buying the audio book itself. Certainly, if you want to buy any other version of it too. So that's
yeah,
an interesting. But no, that's absolutely great, Diana.
yeah. Good. Well, if anyone has any other questions, very happy to chat. Or if you think later on when you're actually in the stage of planning your audiobook and you'd like to get in touch, you can find me in this group, or you can reach out on LinkedIn or dianatheodores.com in my
Let's
website.
let's put all I'll put all those, well, in the post when we
Sure.
finish talking. And yeah, so absolutely, if you want to get in touch with Diana and hear more what she's got to say, or have any actual vocal coaching, I thoroughly recommend her. She is brilliant, as
Yeah,
you can tell.
or even, you might want to just let me hear a little bit of something you're working on, and I can give you some feedback, whatever helps. I really
Fantastic.
would
Yes,
love
yes,
to do that.
that's really helpful. And sometimes it's just a couple of tips from an expert that will sort of set you off on the right path. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Diana.
Great, you're welcome. I enjoyed it very much. It's always fun to
Well,
think about the audio.
it is. No, it's really important, and maybe we don't talk enough about it. But thank you so much, Diana. So we'll say goodbye now and talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.